Chapter 1. The lie that lasted 72 hours. Chris Watts murdered his pregnant wife and 2 young daughters before dawn on August 13, 2018. Just hours later, he stood outside his Colorado home begging for their safe return on live television.
I just want them back. I just want them to come back. And if they're not safe right now, that's what's tearing me apart.
Within 72 hours, he would admit to killing his entire family, exposing one of the most shocking deceptions in modern American criminal history. When Frederick's police officers arrived at the Watts home around midday on August 13th for a welfare check, Chris insisted that his wife Shannon had left after an emotional conversation about their marriage, taking 4-year-old Bella and 3-year-old Celeste, known as Cece, with her. At first glance, it sounded possible, but investigators entered the home. They immediately found details that didn't match his story. Shannon's purse was still inside. Her phone was hidden between couch cushions. Her wedding ring had been left on the side table, and that was beside her bed. Her prescription medication hadn't been touched. Detectives couldn't understand why a woman who was 15 weeks pregnant would, just voluntarily leave home without her phone, medication, vehicle, or even a change of clothes. Something's up. Then a neighbor named Nate Trinistich mentioned something that would quickly become one of the investigation's most important piece of evidence.
Because from the outside it looks like a normal everyday family, husband's going to work.
Well, his home security camera had captured Chris backing up his white work truck directly against the garage before sunrise. Something Nate later told investigators he had never seen Chris do that before. So detectives, they watched the footage closely. They paid attention as much as they could to Chris as they did the video itself. He unfolded his arms, shifted his weight, repeatedly placing his hands on his head, and appeared visibly uncomfortable. While body language alone is never proof of guilt, detectives viewed his behavior alongside the growing list of inconsistencies they had already uncovered to this point. Later that evening, Chris gave a televised interview from his front porch pleading for Shannon and the girls to come home.
When I got home yesterday, it was like a ghost town. She wasn't here. Kids weren't here. I have no idea where they went, and it's just earth-shattering. I don't feel like this is even real right now.
Millions of viewers saw a worried husband searching for his family. Investigators saw someone whose timeline was already beginning to fall apart. By the end of the first day, detectives had quietly shifted from searching for missing persons to examining the possibility that a crime had already occurred. Chapter 2. The perfect family image. To the outside world, the Watts family looked perfect. Chris Watts works at a petroleum company, while Shannon regularly shared photos of their happy home life with daughters Bella and Cece. But behind the smiles, the marriage was quietly falling apart.
Family's life better.
Don't eat turtle. Don't eat turtle.
The family struggled with financial problems for years, filing for bankruptcy in 2015 before once again falling behind on bills. Shannon told friends that Chris had become cold, distant, and emotionally withdrawn. Hoping to save their marriage, they discussed counseling and began reading a relationship book together. Shannon believed they could fix what was broken. She had no idea Chris had already begun building a new life without his family. Chapter 3. The secret affair. The new life centered around 30-year-old Nicole Kessner, an environmental contractor and Anarco Petroleum, the company he works at. Chris met her in June of 2018, and the relationship quickly became a full-scale affair. He falsely told Nicole he was in the final stages of a divorce, creating the impression that, his marriage is already over, this isn't cheating. While Chris was planning a future with Nicole, Shannon was telling friends that her husband had become distant and unrecognizable. Investigators later recovered phone records showing Chris and Nicole exchanged thousands of text messages, spent hours talking on the phone, and looked at apartments together.
Never say anything to him about
Never.
anything about his kids being a problem, anything about his wife being a problem.
Never.
Nicole voluntarily cooperated with investigators, surrendering her phone, and she was never charged. While law enforcement had consistently stated they found no evidence that she even knew or participated in the murders. Prosecutors later argued that rather than face divorce, child support, shared custody, and another baby on the way, Chris chose to eliminate the obstacles standing between him and the new life that he wanted. Chapter 4. The weekend before the murders. On August 10th, 2018, Shannon traveled to Arizona for a Thrive business conference. Well, while she was away, she texted a friend saying that Chris had become cold, distant, and barely wanted to speak with her. Something's going on. Despite her growing concerns, she remained hopeful that they could save their marriage. But little did she know. Instead, Chris spent much of the weekend with Nicole Kissinger. On August 12th, he secretly took her out to dinner using the family's shared credit card. Well, when Shannon noticed the charge, Chris lied, claiming he had eaten with coworkers. Later that night, phone records show Chris and Nicole spoke for more than 100 minutes just before Shannon's delayed flight landed back in Colorado. Before boarding the flight home, Shannon told friends that she planned to confront Chris about their marriage. She believed they still had a future together. Investigators would later conclude Chris had already decided otherwise. Chapter 5, August 13th, 2018, minute by minute. At approximately 1:48 a.m. on August 13th, Nicole Atkinson dropped Shannon off at the home. After their delayed flight from Arizona, neighbor Nate's security camera captured Shannon walking to the front door. It would be the last confirmed recording of her alive. What happened inside the house during the next several hours is known primarily through Chris Watts' later admission, some of which changed over time, so we don't really know. What investigators could independently verify was Chris's activity before sunrise. Shortly after 5 a.m., Nate's surveillance camera recorded Chris backing his work truck directly against the garage. GPS data from the truck, cell phone records, and his work logs later confirmed that Chris drove directly to the Survey 319 oil site, arriving before any co-workers, so he was on site super early. Prosecutors argued that during this time period, Chris buried Shannon in a shallow grave near the oil batteries and concealed Bella and Cece inside separate crude oil storage tanks. That conclusion was supported by the recovery of the victims, work records, GPS tracking, surveillance footage, forensic evidence, and Chris's guilty plea. By the time the workday officially began, detectives would later determine Chris had already attempted to hide the evidence of one of Colorado's most devastating family murders. Chapter 6, Nicole Atkinson saves the investigation. If one person prevented Chris Watts from buying himself more time, well, it was Shannon's close friend, Nicole. After returning from Arizona together, Nicole knew that she had a prenatal appointment on the morning of August 13th. When Shannon suddenly stopped answering calls and never showed up, Nicole immediately sensed that something was wrong. She drove to Watts' home and found Shannon's car still in the garage. What's going on? Chris claimed that Shannon had taken the girls to a friend's house, but Nicole didn't believe him. Trusting her instincts, she called the Frederick Police Department and requested a welfare check.
Please. I can't get a hold of her. I've called, I've texted. Her car's in the garage, her shoes she wears every single day are by the front door.
That decision changed everything. As officers searched the home, they quickly found evidence that contradicted Chris's story, and the investigation shifted from a missing persons case to a potential homicide. Instead of gaining days to cover his tracks, Chris had less than 24 hours before the detectives began closing in on him. Chapter 7, The Porch Interview. On the evening of August 13th, less than 12 hours after Shannon and the girls were reportedly missing, Chris Watts stood outside his home and made an emotional plea for their return. Looking directly into the cameras, he asked everyone who had his family and to bring them home, and described the house as feeling empty without them. To many viewers, Chris appeared to be a devastated husband desperate for answers. But detectives were watching the interview for emotion. They were comparing every word that he said against the evidence they had already collected. The more Chris spoke, the more his story unraveled. The interview quickly went viral, with millions hoping the missing family would be found alive. Instead, it would become one of the most infamous examples of a killer trying to hide in plain sight. Within 2 days, Chris's carefully crafted image would completely collapse. Chapter 8, The Digital Trail. Chris Watt believed he could control the entire narrative, the entire story. What he couldn't control, though, was the digital trail that he left behind. Phone records revealed thousands of messages with Nicole, while credit card transactions exposed the dinner he lied about just hours before the murder. Even more damaging was the technology tried to hide his job. GPS data from his work truck, company work logs, cell phone records, and neighbor Nate's security camera all placed Chris exactly where investigators believed he had disposed of his family's bodies. Every record confirmed another part of the timeline and contradicted another one of Chris's lies. By August 15th, detectives no longer needed Chris to explain what had happened. the evidence already done it for him. Chapter 9, the polygraph. On August 15th, 2018, Chris voluntarily traveled to the Colorado Bureau of Investigation offices for another interview. Investigators already believed he was lying, but before confronting him with all the evidence, they gave him one, final opportunity to tell the truth.
Right now, there's only one person in this room that knows what the truth is, and in about 5 minutes, there's going to be 2 of us, so that's the coolest part.
CBI agent Tammy Lee coordinated the interview while FBI Special Agent Graham Coder administered a polygraph examination. Before the test began, Coder explained the process and repeatedly encouraged Chris to be honest. Chris insisted he had nothing to hide and agreed to proceed. When the examination ended, Coder informed Chris the results indicated deception. Although polygraph results aren't generally, not admissible in court and cannot determine guilt on their own, investigators often use it as an interview technique. In this case, it became the turning point of the interrogation. Tammy Lee and Graham Coder confronted Chris with the inconsistencies in his story. As the pressure mounted, Chris finally admitted Shannon was dead, but falsely claimed he had killed her only after witnessing her harm one of their daughters.
Both my kids are blue and they're gone. So horrible for what I did. And what to do.
Investigators continued questioning him because that version of events conflicted with the evidence that he already collected. Months later, after pleading guilty, Chris admitted he had fabricated the story. The interrogation marked the complete collapse of Chris Watts' carefully constructed lie. Detectives now knew where to search next. Chapter 10, Survey 319. After his confession, Chris directed investigators to the remote Survey 319 oil site where he had worked on the morning of August 13th. What investigators found there confirmed to be their worst fears. Search teams discovered disturbing grounds near one of the oil batteries. Buried in the shallow grave was Shannon Watts. She was still wearing the clothing seen in the surveillance footage from the night she arrived from home from Arizona. Nearby stood 2 massive crude oil storage tanks. Inside those tanks, investigators recovered the bodies of Bella and Cece.
A tragic end to the search for 2 missing little girls and their mother in Colorado. Last night, authorities say they found what they believe are all 3 of their bodies. Prosecutors say it was their father who killed them.
The recovery operation was one of the most emotionally difficult many investigators had ever experienced. Autopsies later determined that Shannon died from a manual strangulation, while Bella and Cece died from asphyxiation. Shannon was also confirmed to be approximately 15 weeks pregnant with the couple's unborn son, Nico. The physical evidence recovered at Survey 319 matched Chris's movements, recorded by GPS, work logs, surveillance footage, and other digital evidence that they had. By the end of the search, investigators had assembled overwhelming proof connecting Chris to both the murder and the disposal of the family's bodies. Chapter 11, Building the Case and the Plea Deal. As investigators prepared the trial, the evidence against Chris Watts was totally overwhelming. Surveillance footage, GPS tracking, cell phone records, financial transactions, forensics evidence, and his own conflicting statements all pointed to the same conclusion. On November 6, 2018, Chris pleaded guilty to the murder of Shannon, Bella, and Cece, the unlawful termination of Shannon's pregnancy, and multiple counts of tampering with deceased human bodies.
Entered a plea of guilty to all 9 counts in the original complaint and information. Those counts include murder in the first degree.
In exchange, prosecutors agreed not to seek the death penalty after Shannon's family requested. At his sentencing on November 19th, Shannon's family delivered emotional victim impact statements describing the devastating loss of a daughter, 2 granddaughters, and an unborn grandson. Chris was sentenced to multiple consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, ensuring he would spend the rest of his life behind bars.
Mr. Watts, why did you kill your wife and 2 children?
What did you confess?
Chapter 12, The Prison Confession and the Legacy. Several months after his sentencing, investigators traveled to Dodge Correctional Institution in Wisconsin to interview Chris Watts again. Well, during the February 2019 interview, he admitted that the story he had originally told detectives that, Shannon had killed the children, it was just a complete fabrication. Although he provided additional details about the murders, investigators continued relying on the physical evidence gathered during the original investigation to establish exactly what happened. Chris Watts wanted to erase his family and begin a new life. Instead, investigators used hundreds of small pieces of evidence, surveillance footage, GPS data, cell phone records, financial transactions, and witness statements to expose every single lie that he told. The carefully crafted image of, the perfect family collapsed in just 3 days. The lasting legacy of the case is not the investigation or the confession. It is Shannon Watts, her daughters Bella and Cece, and their unborn son Nico. Their lives were stolen by someone they trusted the absolute most, and the story remains one of the most heartbreaking family tragedies in modern American history.